Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Thank you for listening to Your Working Life, my podcast series featuring thought leaders in the career and personal growth arena. You spend a significant portion of your life at work, so I'm on a mission to provide you with tools, inspiration, and resources so you can enjoy your career and love your life. And I am delighted to welcome my very special guest to the show today, Ira Chaleff. Ira, welcome.
Thanks so much, Caroline.
I'm really excited to dive into a juicy conversation about you, but I want to tell our listening audience about you first. Ira Chaleff is the author of The Courageous Follower, Standing Up to and for Our Leaders, now in its third edition. He is a co-editor of The Art of Followership, How Great Leaders Make Great Leaders and Organizations, which is part of the Warren Bennis Leadership series. He is the founder of the International Leadership Association's Followership Learning Community and a member of the ILA Board of Directors. Ira is a frequent speaker and workshop presenter on courageous followership and transforming hierarchical relationships into powerful partnerships. And his new book, or newish book, I should say, Ira is so prolific, is Intelligent Disobedience, Doing Right When What You're Told to Do is Wrong. And it's very widely available on Amazon and all major online and standalone bookstores, in print, ebook, and audio. And Ira, let's dive in. What prompted you to write this particular book?
Well, I was teaching a class on followership. And first of all, let me say that some of your listeners may not be familiar with that term. It's the flip side of leadership.
Yeah.
We can't be the leader in every activity all the time. Sometimes how we follow makes as much contribution to the success of the operation as when we lead. There is an honorable way of following. It's not the traditional way that people think of as followers as weak or sheepish. No, this is a partnership with leaders. So I was teaching a class on followership, and we were talking about authority and how most of the time it makes sense to comply with what you're being asked to do. But sometimes it doesn't. The authority figure may have the wrong information, and what they may tell you to do may not be a good thing to do. A woman raised her hand in the class and said that she had an example of this under the table. And I, and I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I have a dog under the table, and it is being trained to be a guide dog for a blind person. And the dog spends the first year and a half of its life with her, learning how to obey all the commands it will need to know to do its job. She said it then goes to a higher level trainer to teach it intelligent disobedience."
Yeah.
And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, the dog must know that when it gets a command, which if executed would be harmful to the team of the leader and dog, it must not obey. And it must know how to resist obeying. And where appropriate, it must be able to find an alternate way to safely go forward." And I thought, what a terrific metaphor for how we all need to be, both in the workplace and in our social lives as well.
That is a great story, Ira, and a wonderful illustration. Thank you for that. So let's dig a little deeper. Why do we often, as perfectly rational adults, obey these irrational rules and commands that we clearly shouldn't?
Well, in any society, we have to train our young. What are the rules of the society? They need to know how to obey. If they can't, they get
Hmm.
sent out of kindergarten and with all the trauma
Oh,
of
yeah.
that. So, obeying is proper laws and rules is part of living in a society. But we seem to teach this too hard. So research then shows that in certain situations, the majority of us would obey when we're given a command that we shouldn't, simply because the person giving the order is an authority figure or seems to be an authority figure. and we displace our own accountability for what we're being asked to do. And that's dangerous. It's dangerous to us, to the leader, to the organization. We always need to ask, is what I'm being asked to do, uh, does it make sense? Is it safe? Is it valuable? And if so, let's do it. And if not, we need to question and push back when needed.
So, is it fair to say that that's really a set of criteria that we should use when trying to determine if we should break or maybe even bend or violate an order or a direction or a rule?
I think that's right. We could come up with some fancy list of criteria, but the essence of it is when I'm being asked to do the right thing to do in this situation, or if I did it, would it have an undesirable or even harmful outcome? And if so, we have to hold ourselves accountable as professionals, as human beings, and say, let's look at this further before we act.
And Ira, thank you for giving us permission to be accountable and actually the directive to be accountable. I think that's such an important part of our professional as well as our personal lives. So thank you for that. I'd love it, Ira, if you'd tell the story of the nurse who was given an order to administer a drug that she knew would be fatal.
This story made a big impression on me. A woman, this was 20 years after the event. She was now a mature woman. Uh, she was pursuing a doctoral degree. But she told me the story when she was fresh out of nursing school and she was assigned to an emergency room. And a cardiac patient was rushed in. And the physician who was on duty ordered her to administer a drug, which, as you say, her training had told her this was not the right drug, this was counterproductive and could be dangerous. Now, imagine yourself for a moment. You're a young nurse fresh out of your training, and here's the physician, with all of his gravitas, and you're
Yeah.
being given this order. And either, if you do the wrong thing, there's a life at stake. Well, she said to the doctor, um, I think this is not the right medication based on my training. And he said, you just do what I said.
Wow.
Now, again, imagine yourself in that moment. And she somehow had the presence to hook up the IV, put in the drug that he had ordered her to do. And she called him over and she said, it's all ready to go. I can't turn the valve because my training says that this isn't the right drug in this situation. If you're sure that it is, you can turn it. And that was enough.
Wow.
Wow, that was enough for him to step back, reconsider, prescribe a different intervention, and which had a happy ending. But how many of us would have the presence of mind, to have a response like that? And that's what I'm trying to do in this book is help us kind of rehearse when we suddenly are confronted with an order that really and it stops us in our tracks, but we don't know, should we do it, shouldn't we do it? How do we prepare ourselves for those moments when really a lot is at stake?
Ira, what I love about that story is the reach of accountability because what that nurse did was bring the doctor into the accountability equation to say, okay, I've finished the order of loading the IV. Now you need to turn it on. That is really brilliant.
Yes, it really was. I don't think I would have had that presence of mind. And in a way, that's why I'm so attracted to the story
Yes.
and to this topic.
So let's talk about career prospects, Ira, because the crux of the show is career development and career empowerment. Intelligent disobedience seems I don't want to use the word dangerous, but risky to your career prospects. So how can intelligent disobedience actually help in your career pursuits?
Well, you're right that disobedience contains risk, but so does wrong obedience.
Mm.
So, for example, a leader with the best of intentions, a manager, just may have the wrong data and ask you to do something or tell you to do something that would have a bad impact on on your customer base, your constituency, and would come back with negative publicity and really be harmful both to the organization and to the leader. So if you stay silent and just comply, and we have this negative outcome, that's not going to help your career. But if you think about it, if you have the courage and the poise to articulate why you think that the person in charge should reconsider before acting, and they recognize that you have just saved them from making a serious faux pas, that does help your career. I'm not saying there's guarantees one way or the other, but there's responsibility, there's risk either way, there's professionalism, and at the moment, making the right choice, doing right, if we're told to do wrong, can actually help your career.
And I will tell you, as a leader in an organization that has a team that works with me, but certainly a team that is directly reporting to me, I so appreciate when my subordinates, if you will, challenge new ideas and challenge me in their thinking, because it grows them as leaders. And quite often, I don't have all the answers, and that's okay.
Yeah, well, good for you. I want to work for you. I mean, that's the kind of leader that we want to work for. Now, in reality, we can all get under pressure. We can get a little bit, short-tempered. We may not be the most receptive to
Right.
new ideas at a given moment, but to the degree that we can establish that tone, that organizational culture, it serves us really well. And those people are actually helping you be successful.
Absolutely. They help me grow as a leader. But let's give our audience, Ira, some hypothetical scenarios because I know you use role play quite a bit when you're conducting your workshop. So give us an example or set up a scenario about how someone reporting to a boss might express a challenging view and how that might play out.
Well, so let's say, that you are given an instruction that you know is going to have an adverse outcome, or you're pretty sure, none of us can be right. The thing to do is not just to counter the boss, because they wouldn't be giving this unless they felt it was the right thing to do. Nobody asks us to do things, well, hardly ever, that are the wrong thing to do. So what we need to do is frame the way we push back in terms of what our manager values. So let's say they value um, customer support and customer loyalty. If we can show them that if we do this the way that he is asking or she is asking us to do, that could actually damage customer loyalty. And, that won't be in any of our interest. So instead, and here's, where you can give one or two options that will hopefully achieve what the manager is trying to do, but will have less downside risk to customer loyalty. So it's the language you choose, the framing that you use to help the leader understand why you're pushing back is critical. I give a lot of examples of this, both in my book, The Courageous Follower, and in Intelligent Disobedience.
Excellent and wonderful coaching. Thank you for that. That's so helpful and I believe really gives tools to our listeners. So this one is particularly interesting to me right now because it's a time of year in my organization where the 360 review are coming around, right? And many of us have been in this scenario when a boss asks for feedback. However, sometimes the less enlightened boss gets defensive when we offer that constructive feedback. So, how do we deal with that? Whether it's in that 360 review or just a verbal opportunity to share feed forward.
Yeah, we can all get somewhat defensive about feedback. I used to be defensive about feedback without even realizing that I was. I would just explain to the person giving me feedback why what I was doing was right. And I didn't realize that was defensiveness. And I had to retrain myself to instead be curious, to ask questions. Help me understand that. Can you give me an example of that? Until I really understood what they were telling me, and then I could make choices around it. So when the shoe's on the other foot, and we're giving that feedback to the manager, we need to again frame it in terms of their self-interest. In other words, you can say something like, I've learned so much from you about so many different things, and I know that you value good support from your staff. I have something to tell you that may be a little bit difficult to hear, but I care so much about you. I think it will help you to achieve more of what you're trying to achieve. So, may I give you that perspective? So, that's a way of framing it as support, not as an attack.
That's great. And thank you for again the tools, the language that we can all use in our unique work environments, because what I'm hearing you say is it's how it's presented really matters, how it lands and how it is perceived. So wonderful. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so here's another one. Thank you for letting me pummel you with questions. So let's say that we have a staff member who's very excited about intelligent disobedience, right? And flexing that disruptive muscle constructively, but the manager ignores that person. And that's going to have a long term impact with similar situations in the future. How do you navigate that?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, we're not always going to be successful. We won't always even be right. We're just all trying to do the best we can in the interests of our company, of our customers, of our career. So, interestingly enough, if the manager uh, ignores you, there's two possible scenarios. One, um, your concern was overblown, and in fact, no adverse consequence occurs. Well, at least they know that you were willing to be candid with them. I'm assuming that much more of the time you're being supportive and only occasionally challenging. So it's not like you earn a reputation for always being the naysayer. But on the other hand, if they ignore you and they do suffer the consequences, frankly, they are not going to ignore you again in the
Yes,
future.
yes.
You see what I mean?
I do. I do. Good stuff.
So even though there's risk, there's also upside potential. But we don't really do it out of fear of the risk or coveting the reward. It's more because it's the right thing to do.
Exactly. And my definition of risk, that quite often risks are worth taking. And what I hear you saying very consistently, this is not disrespectful, right? Disagreeing and disobedience can be very respectful, very civilized, and very professional. So it's all about offering a differing point of view and trusting your gut to do the right thing.
Absolutely. In an extreme situation, you can still be professional, but sometimes you have to be very firm.
Yeah, yeah.
There is that danger that out of a social politeness you may kind of bury your qualms about what you're being asked to do and do it anyway. And in certain situations, that's dangerous. It's
Hmm.
not good for you or them. So there is a firmness, but that firmness can be done with professionalism.
Yeah, I liken it to the grown-up peer pressure, the kind of peer pressure that we might have experienced as children. It happens as adults as well. So it's important to know that you have the power to be disobedient. So, Ira, talk to me a little bit about how managers face this pressure to display what you call the wrong kind of excellence. Tell me more.
This is something that's fairly prevalent in our society, in our economy, also in our public services. We need to have metrics in order to know how are we doing. Are we doing better than last year?
Yep.
Do we need more resources? Do we need to hire more people, etc.? So metrics are important. The problem is that Metrics then start to become the driver. In other words, rather than the customer, the product, the constituent, the metric becomes the focal point. You need to get 20 more sales this month than last month. You need to process 100 more veterans applications for medical service this month than last month. And the pressure becomes so intense. Or in the school system, you need to get your test scores, standardized test scores, up by so much, or we lose our funding. So once you start putting severe rewards or penalties on metrics, people come under pressure to do whatever they need to do to make the metric look good. And that's when they often do something they shouldn't do. And we've seen some very serious examples of that, such as the teachers in Atlanta that received jail sentences because they falsified the test scores on students because of the pressure they were experiencing. We really need to know when to draw the line and really how to help the manager we're reporting to draw the line if needed. Because in the long run, that's where the real risk is when we start to falsify the numbers that we're being asked that we're being managed by.
So, Ira, let me shift to the target audience for your book. It's just a wealth of information, and thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into the book. But who would benefit the most from this book? Who is your target audience?
It's a very interesting question because I'm taking a risk here. My traditional audience has been anyone in hierarchical organizations, whether those are relatively small organizations, large organizations, public, private sector, ecclesiastic, educational. The dynamics of leader-follower relationships apply. What I'm doing here is taking a leap. In addition to that audience, I am suggesting that teachers and parents need to pay attention to this. Why? Because the patterns of obedience are set in the home and in the school. And we can do a better job of preparing our children to make distinctions between when to obey and when to question or to intelligently disobey. That's where we're failing. And I hope to start a conversation in parent reading groups and these kinds of thoughtful places where people worry about how am I going to help my child develop the character that I know she needs as she grows up and moves into this complex world.
Ira Chaleff, what a joy to have you on. The book is extraordinary and clearly a broad audience. So I thank you for sharing your time and expertise. And I want to remind our listeners of the title Intelligent Disobedience Doing Right When What You're Told to Do is Wrong. And help us understand how we can buy the book and follow you in the social media world.
Well, you can go on my website, which is intelligentdisobedience.net. I need to emphasize the .net.
Okay.
Or you can go anywhere, as you've already said, Caroline, where you like to buy books. The book is available. But if you go on the website, you'll also see some interesting videos and articles that may further whet your appetite and give you some tools to work with.
Excellent. Ira Chaleff, thank you so much. I wish you great success. And as I mentioned, you are a prolific writer. So keep me posted about your next book and we'll have you on the show again.
Thanks so much, Caroline.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for tuning in to Your Working Life, where my goal is to help you design your career destiny so it doesn't happen by default. True career and life satisfaction is possible, and it's time to embrace what you love doing so you can do more of it. I'm Caroline Dowd-Higgins. Take good care.